Hi everyone, McBeard here. It's July. We have a new patch. It's good. And one of the reasons why it's so good is it feels like it really shook up the meta, and I think that a lot of decks are viable now for climbing. And if you're still climbing like I am, and I'm talking like climbing, you'll know that losing is less impactful than ever. I feel like I can play any deck I want in ranked right now because losing is almost inconsequential. I have been trying out all sorts of stuff, and my special project for this patch was, what are going to be my 5 go-to decks? One for each faction. What's going to be the deck that I really try to master? Because I feel like there's more options now than ever. When you look at all the factions, I could say that each faction has a competitively viable deck right now. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. In Monster's case, it seems like there's almost infinite variations of the things that you can do with your golds and your bronzes. For some reason, I thought the hardest one to get right first would be the Northern Realms deck, because it seems like they were the least likely to be competitively viable at the beginning of the patch. Nilfgaard had a reveal list, which seemed really strong at the gate. Scoia'tael has a dwarf list, which is still seeing play at the moment. It's pretty strong right now. There's a lot of very high win rates for some of these decks at the top. Monsters has Consume and Weather. Both of these decks are viable, and there's a lot of different variations of golds and bronzes in these decks. Some of them are just kind of swarmy decks that aren't even necessarily Weather. Lots of cool stuff going on in Monsters. And Skellige was the first one I tried. I thought that this one might be hard too, but I actually really like Skellige discard. But for Northern Realms, I wanted to look at Radovid this time, and I wanted to try another Baron list because it seemed like it was less gimmicky and more competitively viable than ever in this patch, and I would agree. I think that the Bloody Baron Radovid list is not just competitively viable, but also really strong in the meta right now, as it's got an almost one-sided matchup against the Scoia'tael dwarf list. Matches up pretty well against monsters since there's so many units to kill, and I feel like it does quite well against the big decks, like the decks with the units that grow in deck and in hand, such as Skellige discard and Nilfgaard reveal, because it runs Scorches and it runs Villain Trettenmirth. So let's take a look at the list. I am pretty happy with this list right now. I've seen a lot of different players play with different variations. True Dawn and Joe Snow have been playing Baron Radovid at a very high level and a lot of success, and they influenced my list a bit. But ultimately, I think these are the cards that I've landed on for my preference. So let's take a look at the list right now. All right, so Radovid's Bloody Baron deck, I call it a Bloody Rain, which is supposed to be a pun about torrential rain, but R2's adepts don't play rain anymore, they play frost. So it's actually more like Bloody Frost, which is not punny, and I'm going to keep it as Bloody Rain. So let's start this off. We'll just go by row here. The Redanian Knights were made viable basically because they were agile in this new patch, and they were decent cards, especially with Weather being around. And since Weather didn't actually go anywhere, since the Monsters matchup is around, and since it actually responds very well to units that ping, such as War Longships in the Skellige matchup and Mangonels in the Nilfgaard matchup, these little guys can get a lot of work done for you. Worst case scenario, they're just 8 strength units with armor. You can do some stuff with Murktabraka if you have nothing else to ping, perhaps, and you want to get a little boost on your side. But generally, these units are just solid units. You play them early in the game. You play them just for points. You know, they'll always get you at least a range of 8 at the worst. And, you know, they have application in some matchups to really, really make them kind of more one-sided, as these are devastate Dagon Weather, which is sometimes a tough matchup. Even though you are killing a lot of their units, monsters have a way of really, really pulling it out at the end, especially if they get the last card, what with Crones and Gravehag being things that you need to basically always play around. So, generally, though, improving the monsters matchup, I feel like you never really want to improve it too much, because monsters are everywhere and they're always a popular faction. So these guys are really good. There's not really a lot of choices to replace these cards with if you're just looking for a trio of bronzes that can just, you know, get you decent value and you don't have anything else to do, such as remove your opponent's units. So I think that Reinforced Trebuchet could be a decent replacement. The only problem I have with Trebuchet, which I generally don't have any problems with because it's one of my favorite cards in Northern Realms, and I'm glad they kept it. The only problem I have is that the ceiling for units that you might want to Scorch or play Villain Trettenmirth is very dependent on your own controlling of Weather and Murktabraka and, you know, in some cases Lacerate. So the Reinforced Trebuchet can stagger units on your opponent's side. So that's mainly the reason why I wouldn't run these cards. And, you know, generally I think that a case could be made that there's other units that can get more for you. I mean, at least the Ballista pings, and, you know, you can do some stuff with the Knight Elects. Generally, though, I think the Redanian Knight is optimal for this slot, in that They don't need to do much for you, but when they can do work for you, they do really crazy work for you by absorbing pings and absorbing weather, which are pings in their own way these days. So that's why I choose these cards here. Rest of the bronzes are fairly straightforward. Aretuza Adept, whenever you have a row you can frost, you frost it, thins the deck, creates a nuisance for your opponent. They need to have a clear, and generally people aren't running, you know, like buckets of clears like they used to. So the Aretuza Adepts are doing really well, and kind of showing off that weather still is strong. As it is just essentially the same thing as having a unit that's pinging every turn, which is also strong. You just can't remove it traditionally with removal. You have to remove it with a weather clear. So I love the Aretuza Adepts in the weather. It's just really, really strong right now. 3 Thunders in this deck for general removal. This makes the Scoia'tael Dwarf matchup very one-sided, as you can kill Yarpen and Mahakam Defenders very easily between your Thunders and the Scorch as well, and Sheila as well for extra added tempo to shoot a Thunder out and then get another card that you may need as well. So the Thunders are just, you know, extra removal, so you can always kill, you know, important things. The other thing about the Aretuza Adepts is usually you want to frost the Siege Row if you want to do it proactively, because every matchup has something that you want to frost in the Siege Row generally. Monsters have the Ericus Behemoth, and if you actually don't proactively frost the Ericus Behemoth, you can't kill it with a Thunder. So it's actually not bad to go first in the Monsters matchup. And you have your Warships for Skellige, Mangonels for Reveal, and in the Mirror, you have other Aretuza Adepts as well. But generally, it's not as good in the Mirror. You don't see the Mirror very often though with this deck. That's important. And Scoia'tael, you actually can ping Yarpen once, so you don't actually have to use a Thunder to kill an unbuffed Yarpen. You can just do something like Triss or Murktabraka or any of the other tools here you have for removal, and you have a lot. Murktabraka is used for sculpting a board for Scorch as well as just removing. It's really a very versatile unit, and you'd think it might be overkill with a card like Triss. It's not. You want to kill everything all the time. You want to have lots of different options. You want to have very flexible options, and you just really can't get enough removal in your hand. It's really important for this deck, and it's very satisfying to control your opponent's snowball-y cards or anything that they might be relying on. 1 first light, generally for the rally, but sometimes you actually may have to clear a weather to win. It's not often, since the Redani Knights do it for you, but I do like it just because having an extra shot to pull an Aretuza Adept is always worth it, since this deck doesn't run Reaver Scouts, and getting the Frost out is pretty important as well. Lacerate and Ericus or Flex, I find that they generally find value, even though you're removing a lot of stuff. Sometimes there are swarmy decks in some situations with buffs where you just need to hammer in the damage to actually get tempo. So these cards do that for you as well. Scorch has a lot of applications. You know, there's a lot of, you know, late game and reveal and discard matchups, and you know, mulligan matchups if it ever becomes meta. You have a way to deal with their giant units, perhaps in a different round as round 3. Maybe you need to deal with them in round 2. So this is really good. Margarita also very good for this as well, as also very good at being a third lock. You may think it's unnecessary. She's actually better than running a Mardrome, I think, because the silver choices I'm pretty happy with. I don't like to run taller. I just don't like seeing the card. It's just a playstyle preference. Some people run Siri and Roach. I don't run Roach. So for a silver slot, I think Margarita is probably one of the best locks in the game, as locking and resetting are both pretty high value these days. So I like Margarita a lot. I like Sheila a lot as well to reload on spells, and reinforcement for any of these cards that I need at the time. But let's talk about Sarah. So I'll talk about Bloody Baron as well here. Bloody Baron gets stronger every unit you destroy, and this deck kills a lot of units. The only bad matchup for this deck really is a super control-y deck, perhaps in the Mirror, or something like Spell Scoia'tael, where there just aren't a lot of units to remove. So in that case, the Baron is not great. And this deck struggles in those matchups. The good news is, those matchups, they don't come up very often. So like every deck has counters, their counter may not always be very good in the meta, so you won't see it very often. That's where I think this deck stands right now. So you want to remove lots of units, but sometimes you'll draw Bloody Baron. It's rare. Sheila will draw Bloody Baron for you sometimes, and it sucks. And sometimes you'll just have Bloody Baron in your hand due to mulligan, or because you have Sarah in your hand, you can put Bloody Baron back in the deck and draw a different gold. So Sarah actually makes it so you're more likely to draw all of your golds, since you're always drawing Bloody Baron. So you can use Sarah in round 1 with Bloody Baron in your hand if you don't have another proactive play you'd like to do, such as Frosting. Or you can actually play Sarah in round 2 because you know you're going to draw Bloody Baron, so you're basically assuring that you're going to draw one of your other golds. So Sarah actually makes this deck really flow well, and you can do a lot of cool things with Sarah. But you're always using Sarah on Bloody Baron, generally, unless you really need to get rid of a dead spell in some situations. But those are very rare. Usually Bloody Baron, because if you have Sarah, Bloody Baron is a sure thing. As sure as your leader, you're always going to get him. So having Sarah on hand is really useful as well. And then Vernon, Triss, and Villain Trettenmirth are all high-tempo removal golds. Vernon works really well, since usually because you're at least reducing strength, if not removing things, there's lots of little things to remove with Vernon. So you can often get your full 18 value from Vernon and the commandos that he would create. Triss, just reliable. Lots of people prefer Philippa as one of the golds here, as Philippa has potential to kill more things. But Triss, as a top deck, or in a round 3 situation where you're just trying to hold your opponent back, and just generally consistency. Triss does work. She usually kills things. She can kill a dwarf, and you know, she's just always strong. Always has been one of my favorite cards. And in Triss's previous incarnation, she was worse, but Vernon was kind of that for Northern Realms. Vernon was a 7 strength unit that did 5 damage. So Triss is kind of like old Vernon, and new Vernon is like super strong. So I just, you know, it's a very aggressive deck, and that's kind of how I've always enjoyed. That's been my play style generally. And then Villain Trettenmirth, you play him late game against discard Skellige or reveal, or anywhere where you're pretty sure that they're going to get a unit for you as opposed to getting any of your own stuff. And usually the end of the game is Villain Trettenmirth, perhaps a spell or many removal spells. Your units are long gone, and your golds might still be in hand. So it's not uncommon that you can end up with a hand due to Sarah, with a hand with Bloody Baron, Villain Trettenmirth, or perhaps Bloody Baron, Villain Trettenmirth, and Triss if you didn't need to use her. And then Villain Trettenmirth is just going to kill something. And sometimes your opponent is forced to play the big unit that they've been investing so much in. So love this card right now. I think it's great. Feels super strong as an 8 strength body, and 1 Scorch, just fine. 3-turn timer, no problem. No, I didn't have a lot of comments to make on the timer. I wanted to definitely feel this card out. I thought that it might be too long. I think people were making some good points, but generally 3 turns, fine with me. And last but not least, the leader, Radovid. Radovid is just a good card. There are lots of units to lock out there, and to have liberal use of locks can make or break some of the matchups, specifically matchups where you need to remove resilience in some cases against Scoia'tael Dwarves or Monsters Consume. But, you know, again, we're talking about worst case scenario like we were talking about with the Redanian Knights. If you have to do it, he's a 13-point play. He does 8 damage, and he's a 5-strength gold body. It's just tempo-wise, the leader you want, and the leader that can probably do the most work for you. If you were to use any other leader here, you would lose a lot of tempo in some of the matches that are really hard to keep up with in some cases, such as Reveal Nilfgaard and Monsters Consume, etc. So Radovid's the leader of choice. I'm going to get some gameplay videos up for you after, but I just wanted to post this guide. I wanted to start talking about the decks that I'm playing because I feel like deck building is better than it's ever been, and I'm having more fun building decks and experimenting with decks than I ever have in Gwent. Like I said, the patch, it's good. So thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you would like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Take care.